Chapter 15, in which we start working on a plan. Dinner was pancakes with apple sauce and a bottle of brown ale in addition to the usual glass of milk for each of us. Brown ale, I thought, and grabbed the fifth pancake, even though I wasn't hungry anymore. I thought I'd simply steamrolled over my mind and seemed to wait out the fitting moment for an eruption, just like the magma inside a volcano. Brown ale. "I've got it!" I yelled, throwing my arms up in the air in elation, and tipping over my glass of milk in the process. "Oh no, Anna," sighed my dad. "Don't you think you're getting a bit old for this?" "Sorry, Dad," I said, and winked at Kai and Louise to let them know that the thing I had gotten the solution to was our problem. In a slightly overzealous attempt to clean up the mess I'd made, I threw a stack of kitchen paper at the spilled milk. But I'd quickly stepped in and did the rest of the cleaning, likely out of fear that my attempts at mitigating the chaos I'd caused wouldn't result in a clean table, but rather in even more chaos. We met up in the workshop after dinner. This time around, Kai and Louise were looking at me for an explanation. "I know what to do," I said. "It's quite simple, actually. We'll give a bottle of beer to Mr. Lasche. Then he's going to leave fingerprints on the bottle, which we'll then be able to compare to the fingerprints on our postcard." Louisa and Kai didn't seem particularly excited. "How's it even supposed to work? If he gets a bottle of beer, he's going to keep it, logically. Are we just going to sneak into his house at night and steal it back?" Kai started guessing around. "That sounds like a lot of effort." "It also sounds like something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend you to do," I called out, thinking back to our nightly expedition during the Christmas holidays. If in any way possible, I would like to avoid crawling to any further coal hatches. There was also a not non-existent chance that we'd be seen by the same neighbor that had threatened to file charges against my dad. Maybe they'd suffer from insomnia and spend a night looking out a window and hoping to catch a glimpse of something to interest them. "I know what we're going to do," said Louisa. "We'll tell him that we found an unopened beer bottle at the side of the road and want to collect the deposit. You know, stocking up our meager party money to buy an extra bar of chocolate or something. And obviously we don't want to pour it down the drain. Since we had noticed him drinking a lot of beer himself, we decided to ask him if he wanted to get rid of the bottle's contents for us." "Okay, but would it not be easier if we snuck back into the arbor and checked this porcelain connection for the stolen pot?" Kai asked, refusing to part with his idea of another night of detective work. He seemed to be really keen on using the coal hatch a second time. "He'd have to be pretty stupid doing that," I laughed, putting the pot into his collection the very next day after stealing it. "It's got an extraordinary enough motive that literally everyone would notice. Nah, I think it's better if we stick to the beer bottle for this one." Kite started on disappointedly digging through a drawer laid on the table next to us. He found luster terminals, boxes filled to the brim with screws. Next to those, a tangled bundle of rubber bands, an old folding cover broken electrical socket, and who would have thought? Kai whistled and triumphantly held out an old ink pad. He opened it, moving his thumb onto the black surface and then further onto a sheet of paper. The resulting fingerprint was much clearer than the ashen ones on a coffee pot. "Wait a second," he called. He looked around and found a crate filled with turnable bottles, waiting to be brought back to the supermarket. Grabbing one of the bottles, brown ale, he pressed a part of the bottle's side onto the ink pad. Then he pressed another finger onto the bottle and onto the paper. He removed his finger, and indeed, he had produced an almost perfect print of his finger. "Brilliant!" Louise and I yelled in unison, until I recognized the potentially debilitating flaw of my genius plan. There's only one thing I haven't considered. We're children and we're legally not allowed to buy a bottle of beer. I saw it in an episode of the show with the mouse. Children are forbidden to buy any sort of alcohol. We can't even say, "Oh yes, it's a gift for our dad." The people at the supermarket literally and legally couldn't give us a bottle of beer. It's against the law for the persecution of children and youth. "I'm pretty sure it's the law for protection of children and youth," Louisa was quick to correct me, even though I couldn't be bothered to acknowledge her, and just continued with my explanation. "My dad only ever buys brown ale, and it would probably take a lot more than just our short holidays to actually find a full bottle of beer on the side of the road, because those that are just laying around on the side of the road are usually empty." Louise and Kai knew what I was talking about. They'd probably made the same experience, and there was little we could do to interest Mr. Lasher in a long-since dried-out bottle of beer. We were quite literally stranded with nothing but water and brown ale surrounding us. We looked dumbly out the workshop window onto an old schoolyard. A lorry stopped by and collected some bulky waste. There was a teenager sauntering across the street towards the youth club situated inside the old school building. Miss Frey arrived on a motorbike. She was employed to clean the old school building in the evening, a job that took at least 2 hours every day or so, I had observed during the last autumn holidays I visited Michel. She got off the bike, carefully parking it against the wall and putting down her helmet onto the seat. The front of her helmet was completely black. It probably worked worse as a helmet than a very large pair of sunglasses. Who knew? Maybe she had a heightened sensitivity to light. Miss Freitas appeared into the building. There was something about her helmet that inspired me. I wasn't quite certain to what, but I felt the beginnings of an idea forming inside my head. Chapter 16, in which we put on a risky costume. If we were adults, we could just buy a bottle of beer with no problems, right? Sure we could, said Kai. And what if we just dressed up as adults? Louisa shook her head and Kai scrunched up his nose. That's not going to work. I could draw a mustache onto my face, and Louisa could put on all the lipsticks she can find, and we still wouldn't pass as adults. We're simply a little too short.